systems are go. About 90 seconds to launch destination.
Mind you, we swore an oath of loyalty, but we are still senators. It's not more speeches in the Senate that will change the world. Rome is dying.
My legions are mustering as swiftly as possible. General Gaius, Julius Caesar, enough!
Welcome, Senators, back to a special episode of our Stellaris Roman Empire campaign. This episode is going to dive into the history of our empire. We've been expanding rapidly lately, and after defeating the last major threat to the galaxy, the Vazarin, we can now comfortably slow down and take a moment to reflect on how we arrived at this point. Things are, of course, ever evolving, and this is but a snapshot in time, specifically 174 years after Emperor Tiberius XIII mandated the use of faster-than-light travel to explore the galaxy in 2200. Make sure you remember that date, 2200, as it is when we started, and gives context to all the other dates. Closing in on 2 centuries since the first scientist Gallus Acilius left the Sol system, the Roman Empire has now expanded to 33 colonies across the northern hemisphere of the galaxy and discovered around 80 unique intelligent species. There are currently 26 different species, not counting their variants, within our borders, with our human population making up the bulk of the demographics with 59%. The humans we have today, of course, are not the same as those from even 100 years ago. With authorization from Emperor Titus X in the year 2311, the Senate voted to genetically alter the human population with a 77% majority in favor. As such, the rebellious nature of humans was pacified, creating a more unified understanding of what it means to be Roman. Deviancy was phased out. Several decades later, in the year 2343, Emperor Tiberius XV, our current emperor, issued a decree to have basic cybernetics installed in all humans, improving their physical health and increasing their lifespan. These are the humans that exist today. Similar genetic modifications have occurred for other species in the Empire, most notably the Aedics, who make up 9% of the population residing within Roman borders. When the Senate voted on allowing the free flow of species between the Kosher Trade League and the Roman Empire, many refugees used this as a way to gain access to Roman territories, obtaining kosher citizenship, and then arriving unexpectedly at planets like Gaia and Rhea. They were put in chains and were quite cooperative, seeing as they are docile, perfectly willing to work as farmers, miners, and other laborers. They were genetically modified to make this work easier for them by growing a large shell on their back and also making them look a little bit more visually appealing to us humans. Many species like the Aedics have met similar fates within Rome, though the Maori from the Kosher Trade League are currently the only species enjoying residency status. A recent vote has determined that all species within the Pax Romana hegemony be granted this residency status within the Roman Empire. This will be looked into in the next few years, but as it stands, residency will extend to the Haitian of the Tyrrhene Republic, the old enemy of Rome. The Haitian are aristocratic in nature and traditional, not dissimilar from the Roman Republic from millennia past. They were first vassalized in the year 2253 under Emperor Tiberius XIV, the warlike emperor, before eventually being the first member of the Pax Romana hegemony in the year 2315. The second empire that entered into the Pax Romana was the Colden Consortium. An unusual species with a troubled past, they lived deep underground as the surface of their planet has slowly been scorched over millennia. During the time of the Great Khan, the Hazar Horde threatened the Colden Consortium, and Emperor Tiberius XV used their fear as a negotiation tactic, offering protectorate status with the promise of aid. In truth, the Roman Empire never planned on sending aid, but instead wanted to make use of Colden space by keeping the borders open as a potential route to the Horde. Eventually, however, the promise of defeating the Horde was fulfilled, and the Colden have been a proud subject ever since. It is a current plan of Emperor Tiberius XV to grant the Colden Consortium new territories and resources as a reward for their cooperation. The most recent empire to enter into the Pax Romana was the Veldenor Zealots to our east. The Zealots, as the name suggests, are religious fanatics that believed that a divine creator lived through the prophet Veldenor before he vanished after a series of mass extinctions. Several centuries later, the Zealots were embroiled in a war with the Ancient Eradicators, a rogue defense system. The Zealots' territory became spotty and fractured in two, creating an offshoot called the Eildar Republic, which eventually was eradicated. With half their empire gone, the Veldonor were seeking aid, and Emperor Tiberius XV extended protectorate status, with promises of re-establishing their lost territories, and so the Veldonor gave up their freedom. So that's the Pax Romana as it stands right now. We, the Roman Empire, currently occupy 129 star systems, with the overall Pax Romana containing 201 star systems. Should we, the Roman Empire, be refused cooperation by other states, it is now within our legal right to force empires into the hegemony if we deem it necessary. So now let's look inward at our current sectors, planets, and systems. First, we have the Terra sector with 10 colonies. The Terra sector, governed by Primus Picentius, is our largest by far, double that of the second largest sector in terms of population density. Overall, the sector produces a large amount of scientific research, alloys, and spiritual unity. It's also the only sector that produces a net positive for consumer goods locally, as all others rely on trade and other current policies to create goods. Terra, our capital planet, our home, has largely acted as an emigration world, fostering many new Romans and sending them out into other specialized colonies. Currently, Terra acts as a scientific and culture hub with many temples, culture sites, and administration in the form of senate houses, a massive planet capital complex, and a grand embassy complex for matters of galactic importance. Elysium was our first colony, established in 2208. It has for the longest time been the backbone of the Roman war effort, producing vast quantities of refined alloys for the Empire. With this responsibility, it was vital to ensure the planet's safety and defense. So after uncovering and encountering the mysterious Sentinels, we agreed to let them guard their territory in return for the ability to call upon them in a time of crisis. As a result, Elysium has a standing army of over 30 million troops with a strength rating of over 5,000, making it the best defended planet in our empire. Though alloy production is now actually largely handled by titanium, Elysium's defensive role makes it a perfect safety net should the worst happen to other alloy-producing worlds. Tiberium was our second colony, founded in 2212 and named after Tiberius XIII, the emperor, who mandated the use of the FTL drive. In honor of him, Tiberium is our tech world, with over 500 million scientists working on projects and pushing the boundaries of what was thought possible. The planet is also home to the Empire's unique Central Research Bureau, a place where the greatest minds of the Empire meet in the name of science. Tiberium has had a tumultuous history. About 5 years after it was established as a colony, a spacefaring entity known as the Crystalline Sovereign destroyed the starbase in the system and rained down crystal shards on Tiberium, killing hundreds of thousands of people and dealing huge amounts of infrastructure damage. After we recovered, we found that the shards they left behind were growing, so we decided to study them. This is still present on the planet to this day, giving us slight research benefits at the expense of some of the minerals. As well as this, we also uncovered the tale of the Huntress. It turns out that a section of Tiberium was actually used as a hunting grounds some 3.6 million years ago, and our excavations led us to find the Blade of the Huntress, a famous weapon made of unknown materials, capable of cutting through any armor with ease. Cicero, our third colony, founded in 2217, has rather unceremoniously become our industrial world, creating and producing almost half of all the consumer goods for the Empire. Though not having much to do with the famous lawyer, senator, and consul, the name just stuck after the colony was established. And while the planet itself was never particularly unique, the Cicero star system was the first system we uncovered traces of the Grunor, which would eventually lead us down a path to uncovering the last Baal relic, allowing the creation of Gaia worlds. Now, in order to stay within the Terra sector, we'll have to skip ahead about 50 years to the year 2272. By now, we had discovered the story of the Grunor and spoke with the last of the Baal species. Using their special life seeding, we could now turn planets into Gaia worlds after we colonized them. So we immediately settled this Savannah world and then activated the life seeding. The planet later became known as Romulus due to the proximity of the secondary colonizable planet we would go on to call Ramus. Romulus now acts as a heavy refinery world with a lot of chemical plants creating volatile modes for the Empire, as well as smaller amounts of energy from the worker classes. Advancing 2 years later to the year 2274, we established our sixth planet within the Terra sector, the colony of Appia, named after the emperor at the time, Emperor Appia the Architect. 10 years prior, Appia was a seemingly uninhabitable, broken world belonging to the ancient Astonine civilization, but on closer inspection, our science team were able to investigate a glowing building uncovering what was a projector masking the true nature of the planet. was indeed a Gaia world. Once we learned more about the planet and deemed it safe, we colonized it and discovered the location of the origins of the Astonine. Similar to the planet of Romulus, the planet is largely designated as a refinery world for exotic gases, but it also provides some energy. The 7th planet to fall under the Terra sector was in 2282. Grunerii was the homeworld of the Grunur civilization, and not too much is known about them, but we know they eradicated the Baal species, and possibly genetically modified them to separate their hive mind. They then relegated them to a small enclave above their homeworld and seemed to take pleasure in keeping them as prisoners there. Grunur Prime was the tomb world with a radioactive wasteland when we found it, but we activated the Baal relic and populated it with the new Baal species, which seemed like a sort of poetic justice. However, this is partially undermined by the fact that the Baal are actually our slaves. Grunerii now acts as a sort of exotic refinery world for psionic charges, gravitic anomalies, and Zro. The 8th planet in the Terra sector is Ramus, the brother of Romulus in the Seven Hills system. The colony was established in 2293. Ramus has had a much more troubled past than Romulus. It's the smaller of the two planets and was once home to a paranoid civilization who thought they were being visited by UFOs and monitored by a signal coming from a nearby bloated gas giant. We couldn't find any evidence of this after the fact, but the civilization nevertheless destroyed themselves to prevent being captured. The planet itself has largely been designated as a mining world, producing about 15% of all of the Empire's minerals, with about 20 billion miners working on the planet, all of which are slaves. The last two planets in the Terra sector have been recently terraformed through traditional methods. The first being Mars in the Sol system, and the second being Colonia Aurora in the Epsilon Eridani system. These fledgling colonies have just started to get up and running properly after 2 decades of migrations. They have a largely unremarkable history so far and no specialization just yet. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the Terra sector, by far the biggest and most complex sector of our empire, with a rich history of precursor civilizations and lost relics. Now we're going to take a look at one of our smallest sectors, Augusta. Though the sector itself is spread quite wide, with 15 star systems, Augusta has just one planet, its namesake. Founded in 2229, Augusta was originally intended as a commercial stopgap along the Via Appia Hyperlane route, the route that forms the bridge for Roman territory to reach out to the east of the northern arm spiral of the galaxy. However, after a war with the Tyrrhene Republic and the establishment of our first galactic vassal state, Augusta was reformed into the bureaucratic center of the Empire. Almost half of all of the Empire's administrative capacity is handled by Augusta, with much of the rest handled by the various Senate houses on other worlds. One of the more historically notable events affiliated with the Augusta sector is the battle at Opsius in 2291, where the now famous Admiral Titus Opsius seized the initiative, using his 20 corvettes to pull ahead of the main fleet and tie down over 100 enemy ships before they could perform a jump behind our lines. This allowed our main fleet to join the fight and was the turning point of the war, which would bring about the end of the Norilga Swarm. Opsius was hailed as Imperator by the fleet and granted a triumph by the Emperor. He is now known as Titus Opsius Norilgicus, and he's still alive today, performing similar maneuvers where possible with his famous corvette fleet. The Opsius system now has a war memorial dedicated to those that lost their lives there, the wreckage of which can still be seen to this day. The Opsius system was also our first discovery of a wormhole, and it's now our best defended system, with a current estimated fleet power of 335,000 from the Grand Citadel there. Now we're going to move over to our southwest sector, the Gaia sector. Gaia was founded in 2242 as one of the first pristine worlds we had ever encountered. Its diamond-encrusted rings quickly encouraged the speedy migration and development of the colony. However, with its lush jungles, black soil, and teeming reefs, Gaia instead became the breadbasket for the Empire. Because of its rich, life-giving nature, it earned its name after the Greek goddess, who was the personification of the earth and ancestral mother of all life. Just over 20 years later, in 2266, Rhea was founded. Rhea has a very interesting history, as initially it was a tundra world, with Titanic-sized wildlife roaming the plains. Upon colonization, we utilized the last Baal relic's life-seeding capabilities for the very first time, transforming the planet into a Gaia world and spawning several of the new Baal species. This was the first intelligent alien lifeform living within Roman borders, prompting our Senate to vote for how we should treat them. The vote was pretty divisive, at 50% wanting them to have residency status and 50% preferring that they either be slaves or be killed. Because of this, they were put in chains and sent to work as farmers on Gaia. But that's not the end of the story for Rhea. Several months later, as the Roman population grew, the native titans became a topic of conversation, and it was mandated that we should essentially turn them into a sort of livestock, hunting them periodically for vast quantities of food. After several titans were killed, the Titan Guardians became enraged and plowed into the largest population centers on Rhea, killing millions of soldiers defending the colony. Fresh legions were then raised by Queso Tadius and a full-scale planetary invasion took place, with 5 months of fighting until the Guardians were killed and subdued. This marks the longest planetary invasion we have faced to date. Nowadays, the Titan hunting industry is booming, with an estimated population of 3 billion working it. The planet was soon to be named Rhea, after the Titaness Rhea, daughter of Gaia. Gaia and Rhea together now produce well over half of all the food in the Roman Empire, and the Gaia sector has also received a new addition, Tau Ceti, a recently terraformed world that has seen strange sightings of a mysterious creature on it, which we're currently looking into. Next up, we'll take a look at Alexandria. Alexandria's sector was largely annexed rather than colonized during total war against the Norilga swarm in 2294. The Norilga's capital, Candia, a boundless ocean world, was occupied temporarily to ensure the eradication of the hive mind, and was later consecrated to Neptune. Alexandria, the sector capital, was quickly designated as a resort world to encourage travel out into the previously thought dangerous Norilga star systems. As an atoll world, Alexandria possesses unparalleled natural beauty, making it a top destination for the wealthy elite, and also as a pilgrimage site for the devout, wishing to give offerings to Neptune at Candia. Alexandria is the only sector governed by a non-human, the immortal, Claws of Sion, who was paid handsomely from the Merchant Guild enclave in the Rhea system in order to boost the trade in the sector. Moving on, we have Brundisium, which was colonized in 2300 after the Norilga War and terraformed into a Gaia world. It received its name as the dormant gateway in the system was reactivated, making it a busy port for trade and exotic goods. Brundisium specializes in energy, though it does have a strong amount of food and minerals, and also has a primary output of the gravitic anomalies resource. Lastly, in the sector, we have Hades. Occupied in 2296, so just before Brundisium, the planet received its name when orbiting satellites around it projected the message, quote, "Do not land, extreme danger," end quote. This could be the reason that the planet has a relatively small population for how long it has existed. Not many people seem to want to go there. Hades has specialized in food, though with its small population it doesn't really yet contribute that much to the Empire. The final planet annexed from the Norilga, effectively ending their existence, was in the Titanium sector. Numeria was occupied in 2297 and marked the end of the war with the Norilga swarm. The planet is rather unremarkable and is currently designated as a rural world, with a large amount of districts built for food, energy, and minerals. Next planet in the Titanium sector is Titanium itself. Colonized just 3 years after the fall of the Norilga swarm in 2300, the planet was originally a relic world. An ancient civilization built a city spanning the entire planet, but all that was left when we arrived was ruins. The colony was named Scythia, and preparations were put in place to restore the Ecumenopolis. It took about 2 decades from its inception, but the planet was rebuilt, a testament to Roman engineering. Billions flocked to the planet to make use of the facilities, and hundreds of millions of specialized workers work now in the protected foundry arcologies as metallurgists for the Empire. It's also heavily defended, with several fortresses across the planet originally built in fear of the Khazar Horde. But after the collapse of the Horde, the first Neo-Colosseums were built, with several billion slaves acting as gladiators across the planet. Almost 3/4 of all the alloy production in the Empire comes from titanium, which got its name after Emperor Titus X. There are 2 other planets in the Titanium sector. Alpes Graia, founded during the wars with the Khazar Horde. This planet's intention was to be used as a defensive choke point, inhibiting FTL travel beyond it and protecting the eastern part of the Empire. The Great Khan died soon after its construction, so the planet fell into neglect, and it's in need of proper designation. Very recently, Olympia was terraformed into a continental world and has future prospects to be a heavy generator-focused world due to its volume of rushing waterfalls and hot springs. The districts have all been prepared, but migration is slow. Next up is the Mechanicum sector. Much like the planets we annexed from the Norilga, we also largely annexed the planets in Mechanicum during our wars with the Site 1066-7 override. After occupation, the machines were dismantled and the colonies are still being shaped today. Two planets of note, however, are Antioch, a planet covered in small ancient cities that are well preserved from a civilization even before the machine's time. The other is in the same system, named Morta, which was deemed as a death world due to the incredibly hostile and vicious flora and fauna on the planet. All these colonies are still relatively young, set up in the last 2 to 3 decades, so they haven't had much time to be organized and designated into specific groups yet. And as they were occupied by us, we haven't had much history with them in terms of discoveries. Generally, things will be moved around a lot on these planets, and the sector they're in may even be redrawn in the future. This annex was originally intended so we could reach the galactic core. While there's no colonies in the core just yet, it's something we're definitely going to be looking into. The next sector we're going to look at is to the west of the Mechanicum sector, Triana. And like I said, the borders between these two may get redrawn in the next 10 years or so, as they could largely be absorbed into one if we wished. Triana has 2 colonies, Triana itself, which was founded early on in the year 2249. Triana was always far out on its own, but it became a critical planet for mining operations and now accounts for 1/4 of all minerals produced in the Empire, the largest that any single planet produces. The next planet, Ionis, was recently colonized in the last decade and is also specializing towards mining, though it doesn't have the capabilities that Triana has. That's it for the majority of the sectors, but there's a few special worlds to take a look at. First, we have New Astania in a sector all on its own. Though with a hyperlane extension we're currently planning, it could connect to the central arm of the galaxy, making it possible to fold into the Triana sector. New Astania is a small habitat built by rebels as part of an ongoing civil war on the planet Astania. Eventually the rebels lost, but the homeworld was still devastated by a subsequent war, which took advantage of the weakened sides. We colonized it in 2315, after the conclusion of our archaeological digs deemed it to be safe. The station was then specialized as a generator, with about 6% of the Empire's energy currently coming from it, though it still has the capacity to account for about 12%. Next is a very unique habitat, and that is Starthrone. In 2370, just 4 years ago, our scientists cracked the code of the Vazaran Gateway Network, and our fleet defeated the Vazaran Colossus superweapon. Time was of the essence for our legions to take the habitat before the remaining Vazaran forces could self-destruct it. After 4 months of battles, the legions were able to achieve victory and keep the habitat intact. Now the blueprints and framework for the buildings can be studied and repaired, giving us access to extremely powerful industries. And that's essentially it for all the planets under our control as of right now. We've also just acquired a new relic world in our war with the remnants of Ilaria, but it doesn't have a sector yet and it's barely being set up. Before we move on, let's take a look at the megastructures we've built in order. Our first megastructures were built in the Vega system. We built a stellar particle accelerator, then a microengineering testing station, and finally, an orbital artificial ecosystem. Combined, these 3 megastructures boost our physics, engineering, and society research by 150 each. Next, we repaired the Mega Art installation at Astane, the same system as the New Astania orbital habitat. This showcase grants us near 500 Unity per month, and while we finished our Unity tradition trees, the boosts of Unity edicts are very powerful, so this installation still proves immensely valuable. Next, at the Black Hole of Gargantua, we built a Penrose Sphere. We specialized it to harvest more energy, and once we understand the principles behind controlled ergosphere harvesting, we'll be looking to stabilize the sphere to double its energy output. Meanwhile, we've also been building a gateway network around the Empire, with a current total of 5 gateways spread out quite evenly, radically reducing travel time. We also built a hyperlane from Trab to the newly named Hellas system. This is the first cut-through we've done from our northern outer arm to the northern central arm, bypassing years of travel time instantly. At the Hellas system, we now have our first foundation for a ring world around the protoplanetary disk of the star. The plan is to eventually build and name our very own Sparta, Corinth, Thebes, and Athens habitable sections. In future, we may be able to increase the size by building outer ring worlds as well, with even more districts. And so, friends, Romans, countrymen, that is it for our deep dive on our planets, our sectors, and a little bit of our history. Our political factions are doing quite well, though the Aetius Peregrini are quite unhappy with some of our recent policies towards purges, slavery, and how we monitor primitives. With the high influence we've been making, suppressing this faction from now on seems to make sense. Lastly, in terms of the galactic community, we are its most influential empire. We formed a triumvirate council with the two other most powerful empires, and we've recently squeezed one of them out. So now it's just the Kosher Trade League and us. We're allowed to determine the galactic focus and emergency measures. Our goal, of course, will be to push them out as well, and then to obtain veto rights so we can determine galactic law. So that's it for my deep dive look into our current playthrough. This took quite a while to make, so episodes had to be on hold for a while I delved back into the archives. If you enjoyed this look back, please consider leaving a like and let me know what you thought your favorite moment of the series has been so far, or if I left out any. Regular scheduling will resume next week, with Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays being the upload days as usual, and early access for patrons on Sundays. Thank you very much for watching, and your continued support. I'll see you in the next one.